Today I'm going to be taking a look at the builder's Antiquity. I see a lot of comparisons between Splendor and Century Spice Road as, straightforward engine builders, and some people will even call Spice Road a Splendor killer. Well, I would rather play builders than either of them, and if you want to find out why, let's get straight to it. First of all, here's a major usability tip for you. If you sleeve your university cards, then you can just put the worker that you upgrade in the sleeve behind the university card to keep it in the right place. Much like Splendor, Builders is a race to a number of points, in this case 17, not 15. Builders has multiple possible approaches of how you can get there. Splendor has kind of two main ideas. In Splendor you can either try and ramp up by lots of little cards and gradually build your engine, probably picking up a couple of nobles on the way, or you can reserve a high card and go straight for it, trying to pick up some big points, trying to outspeed that engine really. I think Builders gives you more options. One of the questions that I think is quite interesting to think about is that university. Do I want to educate a worker who is cheap and I can send to work lots and lots of times, but will be good at that one thing? Or do I take my expert who costs 5 to send to work, but will then be really good at two things? Then he's really action efficient to put him to work, and he is still cost efficient, but he really limits your options. You want to pick up only buildings that require those two things. Whereas if your apprentice is just good at that one thing, you're going to be saying, well, I have lots more options as long as it includes that. And then there's a reasonably good chance you'll be working on multiple buildings at a time. The rule that assigning a worker to a building you already assigned someone to this term costs you an extra action incentivizes you to spread out and do multiple buildings. This kind of makes it feel more interesting to me as well than Splendor or Spice Road, because in those you're generally working towards kind of one card at a time. Maybe that's a consequence of the fact you're only doing one action per turn, whereas in Builders you have 3 actions. There are a whole pile of other things I think that Builders wins out in, and they're all really to do with your options. As a general rule, more viable options means a more exciting, more interesting game to me. And I think everything really feels viable in Builders. Like I said, upgrading your dudes, really good, but I've seen people win without it. Just like the tools, they give you flexibility, but it's really action inefficient to pick one up. A single action giving you just 1 point of building power, that's not very good, but it gives you more options than later on turns. Then you also have the machines that you can build. These are really good to build early. They give you like a free use worker, and again, it's focused on one particular building ability, and you can use them for the whole game. Instead of getting money, you get that free worker. That's interesting. The ability to buy an extra action is great. Normally, you won't want to. 5 coins for an action is very expensive. But if there's something that's really important that you do, it can be worth it. And then you also have, do I want to go with the slaves, who I pay 7 for up front, and then I can keep using, or a regular worker? I think the fact that with slaves you always have the choice of all the ones that are there is really useful. If something you're hoping to come up doesn't come up, you can just go and grab a slave. And obviously you can free them at a later on point if you need to save the points. And of course, maybe I want to take a loan. An early loan can be really good, but sometimes they aren't. I've seen all these approaches work and I've seen them all fail. And that's why I think Builders is interesting. You have a lot of decisions. Maybe there's an argument that it's less accessible due to the increased number of options, but I haven't found that. I'm sure somewhere out there you'll find someone who would find it, too big, too confusing, but for any board game fan, I don't think it would be an issue. Maybe it's slightly less suitable as a gateway than Splendor, because Splendor, you have, I take chips or I buy a card or I reserve. But I think it's still very straightforward. All of these games, I think, play best at 2. And the reason for that is basically to do with kind of the changing board state and forward planning. In a 4-player game, the board state could change hugely from one turn to the other. You can't really count on anything that's out there still being left for you on your next turn. Right? It's kind of very tactical, making the best of the current situation rather than a long-term strategy. And it also doesn't incentivize you to counter your opponents. Right? If I do something which is bad for your own opponent but also bad for me, well then the other 2 players are winning out and we're suffering. At 2 players, something bad for my opponent is automatically good for me. And I think it really opens up choices in terms of blocking at 2 players. As I mentioned in my previous reviews, I think that, size of a game is really important, and cost, people don't seem to talk about these very often. But I bought this for $12 and it takes up no space at all, really. If it was equally as good as Splendor or Century Spice Road, I would still prefer it based on these reasons. But if you like these kind of tableau builders, engine builders, I think you definitely need to give it a shot. I've never played Builders Middle Ages, but I gather that's basically a slightly simpler version, and maybe that's worth checking out as well.